A few years ago, I built this office desk. It was the most simple build I had ever done. I basically just ripped a sheet of plywood down the center and laminated those two together and then put some hairpin legs on the side. Now this desk looked great and functioned perfectly, but it had a fatal flaw. It had all of the cords showing. Every single cord from my computer, my monitors, everything was out in the open. So when I moved into my new house a couple years ago, I repurposed that office desk into my workbench. I did end up building a new office desk, and I actually have a video about that, so if you want to see that video, I'll have a link to that at the end of this video and you can go check it out. Although a word of caution, it kind of sucks because it was the first video I ever posted, so go easy on me in the comments. This workbench has functioned great, but it's very suboptimal. The first thing we need to change, of course, is the top. It has this gray stain on it that, in my opinion, doesn't really fit the vibe in the shop very well, and it has no organization down underneath it, and so it just turns into a complete catch-all for all of my tools and supplies and materials, and it just looks ugly. So in the next 2 videos, I'm going to be addressing both of those issues. In this one, we're going to tackle the refinishing of the bench top. Let's get into it. So to get started, the first thing I'm going to do is clear off this workbench and detach the top. Then I'm going to trim off about 1/4 inch on all 4 sides. That way I can get rid of that edge banding and also the nicks on the corners. Now that it's time to trim the edges on this, I realize it's going to be a lot easier for me to use my Kreg Accu-Cut jig as opposed to removing it and cutting it on the table saw. If you're not sure what a Kreg Accu-Cut jig, it's essentially this jig that allows you to turn your circular saw into a track saw. If you want to learn more about it, I'll have a link in the description and you can go check it out on Amazon. It's only about 80 bucks, and if you want to buy the extensions to make it 8 feet long, it's only about an extra $100. So I highly encourage that. It is a fantastic alternative to spending $800+ on a track saw if you can find it in stock. So now that the workbench is cut and squared up, it's time to add the edge banding. For the edge banding, I'm using furring strips because they were really cheap. Nothing on this workbench is a hardwood, so these will be perfectly fine. To attach the edge banding, I'm first going to be cutting 45-degree miters on all of the joints and then gluing and finish nailing it in place. After I get the edge banding completely on, I'm going to give the whole thing a light sanding and then use wood filler to patch up all of these miscellaneous holes. The best way to measure exactly where your miters land is to already miter one side to 45 degrees and clamp the other side onto your workpiece. Then you can dry fit this where it's supposed to go, butt it up against the other piece, make sure it's all lined up at 45 degrees, and then take a pencil and draw a mark on the outside exactly where that piece will end. Then I like to freehand draw a 45-degree line on the side that's being cut. That way when I go to the miter saw to cut that side as well, I make sure to cut the miter on the correct side. Occasionally when you're using an air nailer, the nails don't sink all the way in, so that's where this comes in. This is a nail set, and it's spring-loaded. So you put this on the nail head, you pull it back, and you let go, and it drives that nail the rest of the way so that it's underneath the material. So I'm going to go around and make sure all the nails are set beneath the surface. Now I left these strips proud, so the next thing I need to do is plane them down. For that, I'm just going to use a simple block plane and then do some wood filler, and after that, it's time for sanding. While sanding the top, I primarily used two tools. That was my random orbit sander and my belt sander. The number one thing that I was concerned about while doing this is sanding all the way through the veneer. And of course, the stain plays a big part into if that's even possible, because what ended up happening is that the stain soaked completely through the veneer in some areas, and in order to get the stain completely out, the veneer had to go as well. And in my opinion, it looks way better to have some wood filler and some holes in the veneer as opposed to having gray lines and blotches. So instead of just using the wood filler to cover up the nail holes, I'm also going to be using it to fill up those divots where I had to sand through the veneer to get the stain out. And again, I think that this is going to look way better than having these gray blotches all over. Okay, we have all the stain sanded off, we have all of our nail holes puttied over, as well as all of the divots in the veneer. So we are good to give it a final sand, get rid of all of this extra wood filler, and then we are done. Okay, well that completes it for this video, and to be totally honest with you, while I'm glad that there's not exposed plywood on the side and just really terrible looking edge banding, as well as that nasty green stain that just didn't fit, I am not super pleased with how it turned out. And I knew that this was a very large possibility that the stain would soak all the way through the veneer, which it did in 10–20% of the entire top. Which is why you're starting to see that second layer show through. So I was hoping to put a few coats of polyurethane on top of this just to seal it, but I don't think I'm going to do that, because now that I have a good look at it, I think that the best route here would be to put a thin roll of laminate across the top of this. Just flat black laminate or some other neutral color. So stick around if you want to see that process. I think that would look way better, but it all depends on how much it costs. With this workbench project, my main goal is to have a functional workbench, which is why I'm going to be installing drawers. And so far, I mean, this is just as functional, even if it doesn't look super pretty. But it is a nice bonus to have a good looking workbench as well. So I'll keep thinking about that. So keep your eyes peeled for a video about installing laminate after the next. Hopefully I can fit that into the budget and get it done. So I was talking earlier about how this is a two-part series. The first part is the workbench top. The second part is going to be building drawers underneath it. So if you're interested in seeing how I do that, stick around. I post a video every other week, so you'll be able to see that in just a couple weeks. If you enjoyed this video or found it helpful at all, please consider subscribing to my channel. That helps me out quite a bit. And if you're interested in any of the tools that I use throughout this process, I'll have links to those in the description and you can check those out. Earlier I was talking about the desk that I made a couple years ago, and I'll have a link to that video just up in this corner and you can go check that out there. Again, remember, it was the first video I had ever made, the first video on my channel, period. So it's kind of terrible, so just, it's a cool build if you want to watch it, but don't expect too much. So that's it for this one. I'm Clayton, the Weekend Builder, and I'll catch you in the next one.